Shields up, Ironbreakers. Today I'm going to be bringing you my review to Warhammer 40K Space Marine 2. This title was sent to me by Focus Entertainment so that I could give it a look and tell you guys my opinions on it. And here's a funny thing about Warhammer. I actually used to play Warhammer, the tabletop game, back in the day, but it was actually Warhammer Fantasy Battles, because naturally, as a lot of you guys will know in my channel, I am a massive fan of dwarves. And the interesting thing is, if you guys actually play the tabletop Warhammer Fantasy game, you'll know that this is one of the older editions of the Dwarven Codex, because the new editions are actually, you know, they have different images in them and stuff and whatnot. So this is one of the older ones. But I never really got too much into 40K because I was always more into Fantasy Battles. But having said that, one of the last products that I ever bought of Warhammer Tabletop was actually the big box that had a mix of Tyranids and Space Marines, because I was finally going to start making a Space Marine army. And a friend of mine was going to make a Tyranid army, so we basically split the box in half, and he would get the Tyranids and I would get the Space Marines. However, you know, me and my friends, we kind of drifted apart in life because everybody started making their own families and that type of stuff, and we ended up not really having time. So I did, however, buy the Space Marine Codex. This is pretty much brand new. I've barely even opened it because this was me just in the planning stages. I was going to make like a Blood Angels chapter army, which, you know, I think was going to be pretty cool. I imagine that probably now the Space Marine Codex also might have like a different image. I actually haven't looked it up, but I would imagine that this one's probably pretty old as well. So yeah, I do have a bit of a history when it comes to Warhammer, but I'm not like super knowledgeable when it comes to 40K. I know a lot of stuff about Warhammer Fantasy, but 40K was not really my specialty. Having said that, I did play the original Space Marine game, the first one that they've made, and I thought it was really cool. I had a fantastic time playing that. I enjoyed playing as Titus. I love, you know, having the big hammer, big axe, just like cleaving orcs in half. I still always remember the Cockney accent they gave those orcs. I think that's like a lore accurate, kind of like what orcs are supposed to sound like in 40K. And I always remember that moment where when you first encounter the orcs, they go like, "Space Marines!" And I was like, dude, that's so friggin' awesome. So I have really good memories of that game. So when Space Marine 2 came out, I was like, you know, I should check this out. And Focus Entertainment was kind enough to send me over a review code so that I could check it out. And I've live streamed the whole thing here on the channel that you guys can check out if you want to. Me and my friend Chris actually ran the campaign in veteran difficulty, which was a lot of fun. It was pretty challenging. I know that there's one difficulty above that. I kind of am a little bit scared to even go after that, considering the amount of times that we ended up wiping on veteran, but it was a pretty fun experience all around. However, I know that right now a lot of people are wondering, should I get Space Marine 2? Is this game worth it? Is it not? And a lot of you guys might be wondering, okay, but what is this game like, right? Is it just a third-person shooter? What is the deal? And I kind of feel like one of the things that you can kind of compare it to, if you've never played the first game, is it's almost a little bit like Gears of War. And the really cool thing that I appreciate is that they allow you to play the full campaign in co-op, because it's one of the things that I always like playing with friends, is these types of, you know, you even used to call them back in the day the dude bro shooters almost. And I personally appreciate playing those games with friends, and the way that the game works is that if you are not playing with friends, you still have two Space Marines that are with you. These are all characters that are part of the story. There is your main character, which is Titus, which is the same dude that you play in the first game, even though a lot of things have happened since the first game. I'm not going to get into any spoilers or anything like that, because I feel like you should experience the story for yourself. And then there's another character called Gadriel and another character called Chiron. And they're all part of the Ultramarines. That is the chapter that you're going to be playing as in the main story. And even during the, because you have three main verticals in this game. So you have the main campaign, then you have the co-op PvE mode, which is basically these repeatable missions that you can go and do, and you can grind stuff like your characters actually level up in the multiplayer PvE mode and whatnot. I'll talk more about that. And then there's also a PvP mode. Now, when it comes to the PvE mode, you can customize your whole Space Marine with different chapters, and there's even like heraldries that you unlock of the specific chapters that exist in the game and all that stuff, which is really cool. I really appreciate the way that they went about doing that, because I've been customizing my Blood Angel, but the idea is that all of the characters are Ultramarines, but you know, in the customization it doesn't really matter. You can make them whatever you want. However, for the campaign, there isn't customization. You are an Ultramarine. You can't play different chapters in the campaign because the whole story is about the Ultramarine chapter. And it involves a lot of stuff around the Ultramarines, and you get to fight off Tyranids as well as Chaos, and in my opinion, I feel like they've absolutely nailed down what it should feel like to be a Space Marine whilst you're fighting off against the Tyranids and Chaos. I definitely feel like they nailed the vibe, they nailed the aesthetics. We'll talk more about visuals a little bit further ahead in the video as well. But like the aesthetics of the overall world as you are advancing, it's just, you just feel like, yes, it's very believable. Like they took great care in showcasing everything from the different little pieces of tech to the tanks that show up in the game. They're all very much accurate to anybody that has played the tabletop game or anybody that has read, you know, the lore books and all of that stuff. At least from my experience that I have with 40K, I was like, bro, this is the most that I've ever felt like a Space Marine has been this game. Having said that, like I said, I did play in veteran difficulty, so a lot of times I also felt like I was giga squishy, but that's by design. You know, you play on a higher difficulty, it is what it is. Even though they did say that veteran difficulty is the intended difficulty, but pretty challenging. And I liked it. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely liked it because it kind of forced you to learn how to work with the limited amount of ammo that you have, as well as how to deal with monsters when they get into close quarters. Because one of the things that they definitely did right is they not only nailed the aesthetic, the overall feel, the ambience of you being a Space Marine, but also the actions, the weight, the way in which the characters move is believable. Because, you know, you might just think, I mean, how hard can it be? You know, it's just a Space Marine. Well, yeah, but a Space Marine is carrying around a hulking armor, right? And it is very important that they convey the weight as you are moving, as you are running, as you are even rolling in some situations. The rolling part is the one that is kind of like harder to imagine a Space Marine actually rolling in that big beefy armor, but for gameplay reasons, you got to be able to do it. Otherwise, you're not able to just dodge everything that they're going to be throwing at you. But in terms of the actions, I felt like the firing of the guns felt good. The different guns also felt different enough that you're like, oh man, you know, this is actually a different gun. There's las rifles, there's melta rifles, there's all of these different rifles that you encounter in the Space Marine universe, even though, if I'm being completely honest, the majority of the time I was running around with a chainsword because I love melee. And that is actually one of the things that I wanted to bring up, is that usually when you come into a third-person shooter or even a first-person shooter, I feel like the melee action ends up suffering a lot. But somehow, I don't know what this team has done, and I believe that the game was even delayed a couple of times, and let me tell you, whatever they did during that delay, I can assure you that delay was worth it, because the melee actually feels spectacular. At least in my personal opinion. I know that different people are going to feel differently. I remember reading a review from some news outlet where they were saying, parrying is super hard in this game, or something like that. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I can parry things that aren't even on the screen because the indicators are that good. If you're actually paying attention, you'll be able to parry attacks that are going to be coming off screen because they went to the trouble of actually showing the different indicators, which I was like, bro, this is friggin' awesome. And the parries are really, really cool. Like, small monsters are coming at you, and they're jumping, and you parry, and your dude just goes, he pulls up the chain sword, and just like saws a friggin' Tyranid in half. Feels absolutely phenomenal. And that's just with the chainsword. Obviously, there's also counters with hammers, and there's a power sword. I haven't really used the power fists. I need to check out the power fist as well. It's just, right now, strangely enough, you might think, oh, Rurikhan's gonna be all about the hammer. Strangely enough, the weapon that I've really gotten into is the friggin' power sword. Power sword feels fantastic. You electrify it, go for heavy moves, you start knocking down enemies and slashing them up. Executions where you just hear the metal sounds of the sword going like, and slashing. Like, I know, I'm even doing the sound effects. it just feels really good. Like I was excited every moment that I was playing, just from like killing stuff. It just got a little bit frustrating whenever we would get some of those more annoying flying enemies. I think they're called neurothropes or whatever. Those guys were like legit hard. I was like saving grenades specifically for those, because those would usually be the ones that would force us back to checkpoints. But you know, there's tons and tons of stuff for you to kill, and tons of different ways for you to kill it, and pretty much felt absolutely phenomenal. Another thing that I really enjoyed is whenever they give you access to jetpacks, which, by the way, there's one whole class in the multiplayer that is dedicated to using jetpacks, which I still haven't played that class because I'm completely addicted at playing Bulwark, which is sword and shield. As a matter of fact, I was like, why can't I have sword and shield in the main campaign? Come on, guys. Give me sword and shield. It feels so good. But yeah, there's like whenever they give you the jetpacks, it feels so nice because you can just like jump into the air and then come crashing down either with a chainsword or with a hammer, like land right on top of them, blast them up. It feels absolutely fantastic, really satisfying. So they really nailed the moment-to-moment gameplay, the atmosphere, the overall vibes of what it should feel like to be a Space Marine. Another mechanic that they added, which I really like, was this gun follow-up mechanic, which can be done in different ways depending on how you engage in melee. But basically, in certain situations, like let's say if you're using the chain sword and you hold down the attack button, your character will do like a kick or something like that. You'll push one of the smaller monsters back, and then you'll be able to punish it with a gunshot that it automatically aims at them, and it's almost like a little mini cinematic. And those just felt really good because that's kind of like how you recover armor. So you'll be in the thick of battle, and healing is actually extremely restrictive. I don't know if that's like because we're playing on veteran mode and there were maybe just less stim packs lying around, because there are stim packs that you can kind of pick up and heal yourself and do all of that stuff. But I found that the healing was really hard. So the idea is that you're constantly recovering armor, which kind of makes sense if you're a Space Marine, because if you think about it, you know, most of your defense, what is it? It's your armor. So you're recovering armor by doing like these melee executions, which is whenever you put one of the bigger monsters, you know, not the smaller critters, but like one of the bigger monsters, who put them in a state where it can be executed. You can go up to him, execute him, and there's like this really cool animation, and then by the end of that, you'll get 1 pip of armor. And, you know, damage goes through armor before it gets to your health. So if you're able to constantly regenerate armor, you're almost invincible. And that would be kind of like the way that I would play. I would run right into the front lines, engage in melee, execute as many enemies as I could, shoot as many of them with the gun follow-up as I could, and, you know, just basically be a tank. And that's actually really cool because you can do that in the multiplayer PvE co-op mode as well. You can basically just try and draw the attention of as many enemies as possible and just stay there, be a target, and tank for your team while they're pelting enemies from behind, which is really nice. So, again, the moment-to-moment gameplay, the shooting, the melee, all of that stuff, absolutely top-notch. Loved it. Animations, fantastic. Executions, super awesome. So, what are the criticisms that I would have in regards to the campaign? Well, it's a little bit on the repetitive side. So this all depends on how much you end up enjoying the action, because it's one of those things, when you're enjoying something, it being a little bit repetitive might not bother you depending on the type of player that you are. But say, for instance, whenever you're fighting the Tyranids, the technology is very impressive. They have like swarms of Tyranids, like hundreds, maybe even thousands of Tyranids coming at you at any given moment. And it's very impressive to see on screen that they're able to put all this stuff on screen, and we'll talk more about performance at the end of the video for those of you curious. But in my rig, it was actually running pretty smoothly, between like 40 and 60 FPS, but keep in mind, I am playing at 4K on the 6900 XT, so, you know, considering the amount of stuff that this game is putting on screen, it's not surprising that it would dip below 60 for me. But again, I'll talk more about my hardware and all that stuff a little bit further ahead in the video. But it was one of those things where it's like, it's really cool, but once you've seen them actually crawling up the walls and doing that stuff once, the novelty kind of like ends up wearing off, right? And you're just used to seeing them crawl up walls, and eventually the whole thing about you being swarmed by the horde type of gameplay that you are getting, it will get a little bit repetitive for some people. Now, this doesn't really bother me too much, like I said, but I know that for some people that will be a problem, so just be aware that it is going to feel a little bit repetitive. Now, the thing is, even though the things that you are doing are repetitive. Your objectives are going to be different, like, oh, reach the targeting system of this weapon to activate it. Oh, defend this thing. And now there's gargoyles on the chains of this other thing. You got to shoot the gargoyles down. And now this wave of enemies have spawned and all of that stuff. And Chaos, even though it's slightly different when you are fighting Chaos, because you have, you know, Chaos actually employs a lot more range than Tyranids. Even though the Tyranids themselves also have ranged units, Chaos is sometimes a little bit more threatening because they got Terminators that shoot like missiles and stuff like that, and they have like all these other different units like with flamethrowers and stuff like that that are super dangerous. So it does change things up a little bit, but the idea remains kind of the same. You're running through, you're doing an objective that is relevant to the story, and these dudes just happen to be in your way, and you have to go and kill them. And like I said, for some people, that is going to become repetitive, but to me, personally, I enjoyed the whole thing throughout. Now, the campaign is not particularly long. It took me about 11 hours to finish the whole thing, which, you know, it's 11 hours, but it's a good 11 hours. I feel like it doesn't overstay its welcome, which is a good thing, because sometimes games have this tendency like, oh, what about some more? And what about some more? And what about some more? And I could see it actually becoming maybe too much. But the good thing is there's more campaign after you are done, because the way in which they did the multiplayer side of things, which, by the way, again, the campaign fully playable with 3 players. And here's a cool thing. The 3 players will actually play as 3 different characters. So whoever is the host is going to be playing as Titus, who is the main character. And he has a special ability which kind of like makes him deal more damage and regenerate health and all of that stuff. But the second player will actually play as Gadriel, and he has a different ultimate ability, which is like a battle shout that empowers your friends. And then the third player would actually play as Chiron, who also has another different ability that does this scan thing, and all of the scanned enemies will actually take more damage. So it's cool. You guys will have to kind of like play with these different abilities and kind of like strategize around those if you're playing with friends. I don't think that there's like matchmaking in the campaign. In the campaign, if you're playing, you're either playing with friends or you're playing with the actual NPCs. But for the PvE side of things, the multiplayer PvE side of things, there is matchmaking. You can play with randoms, and you can also play with bots. So let's talk a little bit about the multiplayer side of things, which was actually something that I was somewhat impressed by. But before we jump into the multiplayer, we have to talk about the epic stuff that installs when the game launches, because I've seen some people complaining about it, and I understand, because they're, you know, a game starts installing random pieces of software on your machine, and you're like, whoa, 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 what the hell is this about? Especially when it comes down to Epic, because a lot of people don't like the Epic Game Store, which is completely understandable. So let me explain to you what the game installs. It installs like this Epic third-party thing, and a lot of people think like, oh, you have to create an account on Epic, and you don't have to do any of that stuff, at least as far as I'm aware. And you can uninstall the Epic thing, and the game will still work. So why is it installing this Epic thing? It is because they are using the Epic backbone to be able to do crossplay. So that's what the Epic stuff is that you're installing in the beginning. So if you don't want to do crossplay, you can just turn that off and you can keep playing the game, and the multiplayer will still work, at least as far as I'm aware, and everything should still work just fine. On the other hand, if you actually want to play crossplay with potentially Xbox and PlayStation, you'll have to keep that stuff. Not only the game supports crossplay, but apparently it also supports cross-save through a system called Pros. I haven't really used that because I'm just choosing to play this one on PC. I'm not really playing on any other platform, but I greatly appreciate the fact that developers actually went to the trouble to plan for using both cross-save and cross-play, because it is definitely a feature that I often wish to have in more games, because it is rather useful. Sometimes you might want to play on your console, sometimes you might want to play on your PC if it's a game that you really enjoy, so I can appreciate the extra effort that the devs went in and did. Another interesting thing is, even though the game uses easy anti-cheat to make sure that players aren't cheating and all that stuff, even though I don't know how easy it is to go around, I usually don't engage, not usually, I simply don't engage in cheats at all. So I don't really know that much of how hard it is to bypass anti-cheat, or if that's even a thing that you can do. But the idea is they want to make sure that the game remains a level playing field, and obviously the last thing that I would want to see is somebody coming in and start mowing down Tyranids by one-shotting everything. That would kind of suck. I enjoy playing the game. I don't want to be carried, and I think it would be pretty lame if there's people just like cheating to get their unlocks early or whatever. It's just kind of lame, but whatever. People are going to do what people are going to do. It is what it is. We all know the drill. But the interesting thing is, even though it has easy anti-cheat, it does not, in fact, have the Nouveau or any form of DRM. And when the devs were asked about this, they simply just said, nope, we're not going to do that, which is really, really cool. Because usually when you have these DRM systems implemented into games, it ends up being a downside, and most people don't want to have to deal with that. And that way we know for a fact that there's not a DRM program actually messing with performance on computer, because despite what the idiots over there at the Nouveau might say, the Nouveau absolutely shreds performance, and you all can, you guys can go suck an egg or something, because the people over at the Nouveau are completely insane in their heads with some of the recent Twitter posts that they've been doing. But whatever, that's neither here nor there. As I was saying, talking more about the multiplayer, there's two multiplayer modes besides the co-op campaign, which is the PvE mode. And the really cool thing that they did with the PvE mode is that whenever you're going through the campaign, a lot of the quest, I was going to say quests, but a lot of the missions that you end up doing, they're not just executed by your squad. You have your squad, and there will usually be instructions that have to be given to another squad. And these are not active choices that you're making. It's just related to you through narrative. Wherein it's like, okay, we're going to go after this objective, but in order to do this, we need this other squad to go do a diversion. Or we need another squad to go hunt this big hive tyrant or whatever it's called that's over here commanding all of these Tyranid forces, right? And there's these other squads of Space Marines that are doing those side objectives while you are doing the main mission, right? And there's even like radio communications that you'll have with these squadrons while you're doing the main campaign. And basically what they did for the co-op mode that you can do is you are going to play as those squads, and you are going to see what those other squads were doing while you were doing the main objective in the campaign. So basically you get to experience the other side of the story and see what those squads were doing at that time. And I was like, that's actually a really cool idea, because basically first you witness the story through the eyes of the main character and the protagonist and all this stuff, fighting the big bad bosses. And then you see what challenges the other squads were facing. And currently there's 6 of these co-op missions that you can do. They call them operations. And each of them seems to last around 30 minutes, give or take, depending on how good the people you are playing with are. Or maybe even if you're playing with bots, this all depends on how good you end up playing it. They can be 30 minutes, they can be a little bit less, they can be a little bit more. And which is a pretty decent size, but basically it gives you another like 3 hours of gameplay, like 3 hours of unique gameplay, because these missions are obviously designed for you to go ahead and replay those over and over, because your characters do that level up, they become more powerful and all that stuff. Now the thing that I find kind of weird is that I still haven't completely understood how the difficulty is going to scale on those missions, because interestingly enough, if you play the campaign on veteran and then you just go into the multiplayer and start playing the multiplayer, it is going to feel super easy, which was a little bit weird. I was like, oh man, this was way harder when I was doing it in the campaign. Fighting this on multiplayer feels super easy. Now, I believe there's supposed to be some type of dynamic difficulty, which is going to adapt as to how well your squad is doing. So maybe I just haven't seen it yet, because I've only done a couple of the multiplayer missions to get an idea of what those are like. But now, another thing that I would like to bring up in regards to the multiplayer is whatever they've done with the netcode for this game was actually very surprising for me. Now, as with anything that involves the internet and latency and all of that stuff, your mileage will vary. But my personal experience was actually exceedingly positive. I was super surprised of just how well the netcode plays out. To give you guys an idea, the friend that I was playing with was Chris. He does some stuff for me here on the channel. You guys might have seen him already on a couple of videos or on a live stream or something like that. And we were both playing through the campaign, having an absolute blast. And he's all the way in Florida, and I'm all the way in Portugal. As you can imagine, not the most ideal of situations for multiplayer when it comes to latency. According to him, because I was the host, according to him, there was no lag. Despite the fact that it had like a red indicator saying that like, oh, you only have one bar, your latency is going to be bad. He actually didn't have any lag. And let me tell you something else. Usually whenever you have lag, it is going to be very reflected if you're trying to do like scoped shots and stuff like that in shooter games. He was actively sniping on a lot of these missions, and he said, oh, I never noticed any noticeable lag. Everything was fine. Very surprising. But even more surprising is when I jump in, because there's also that thing where it's like, you know, you're playing with a friend, your friend has a good internet connection, you have a good internet connection, things are smooth. The whole thing usually goes tits up whenever it comes to playing with randos. So I jump into the multiplayer PvE stuff with complete randoms, and I was like, oh wow, there's actually no latency issues. I was super surprised. Now, I haven't tried any crossplay. I disabled crossplay at the beginning just to ensure maximum stability for my streams, and I haven't turned on crossplay again. But like, I was just, you know, jumping into random matches with other people, and no latency issues, no problems with me using melee on monsters, parry timings, all of that stuff was pretty much flawless. Doing executions, no issues. Now again, I want to remind you, your mileage may vary greatly when it comes to this type of stuff, and this is still the early days, so maybe the servers can get overloaded at one point, even though I think the connections are peer-to-peer. So I'm just like super surprised at how everything just ran fine. And this was in multiplayer PvE. Now, another really cool thing about the PvE aspect of multiplayer is that even when the game might eventually lose a little bit of popularity in the future, that's usually a concern that people have, like, how will I play the multiplayer and grind out the multiplayer aspects of the game when there's not that many people playing. At one point, I didn't know exactly how this is going to work, so I'm just like, okay, I want to go play this mission. I click a mission. The game instantly launches me into the mission with 2 bots. And I was like, oh, they have a bot system that you can just go in and play with AI. Cool. So I'm playing with the bots and everything's going like super smooth, no issues whatsoever. And then all of a sudden I look at the bots and I was like, wait, the bots' names have changed. And I was like, oh, these don't look like bot names. These look like player names. So the bots were seamlessly replaced by players midway through the mission. And I didn't even notice. There was no noticeable like latency glitches, no problems. Everything was running flawless, which was very surprising. And I want to once again caveat this like a third, a fourth time. Your mileage may vary greatly, okay? I have a good internet connection and, you know, things were running smoothly. I was just very surprised. I was expecting it to be a lag fest because, you know, whenever you're playing with randoms, there's somebody out there using their neighbor's Wi-Fi and everything goes out the window. It was seamless. I was super surprised. So then I jump into PvP because I was curious to see how that was going to be. And here's an interesting thing. PvE and PvP have like these different progression paths that you have to go through. So if you're playing PvP, you're going to be leveling stuff for your PvP. If you're playing PvE, you're going to be leveling progression for your PvE. So these are going to be different aspects of the game that you're going to be progressing in. But the PvP, once again, I was expecting that one to be more laggy because PvE you're playing with 3 other players, so the points of failure there are much less. Whereas PvE, I think it's like 6v6 or something like that, and might be even more. I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember how many people were in multiplayer and PvE. But again, there was only 1 or 2 instances where I saw a couple of players that they were lagging a little bit. But even that, it wasn't like, oh my god, they're lagging so bad, I can't even shoot them, this is completely busted. Didn't experience that. I was super surprised. And it was pretty fun, the PvP. It's like super straightforward. It's nothing too special. You have your 6 classes or however many classes there are. I've mostly just been focusing on playing Bulwark, which is the sword and shield class, which actually kind of sucks in PvP, I find. Maybe I just don't know how to play it, but I always find that when I start swinging at somebody and they pull out a gun on me, it's like, nah, it's over, bro, you're dead. Unless I have the battle standard that gives me regenerating armor, it's pretty much like, yeah, usually you're better off, which is weird, but even as a Bulwark, you're kind of like better off just putting down the standard and shooting with your gun, which feels a little bit weird. But, you know, it is what it is. I'm still learning how to do the PvP stuff properly. But I still had fun. As a matter of fact, I did like 4 or 5 matches, and I've won all of them. Now, I'm not saying that was because of me, because it probably wasn't. I probably had good teams. But, you know, I still had a good time. So, all around, I was surprised that the game delivered pretty much on every aspect, and I enjoyed every aspect of the game. Now, naturally, is this game going to be worth it for you? So long as you keep in mind what I said about the campaign, that it can get a little bit repetitive. If that's going to be something that bothers you, maybe you might want to wait for a discount or something like that. Because one of the things that I will say repeatedly is that the game absolutely nails what is the fantasy of being a badass space marine, kicking Tyranid ass, kicking Chaos's ass, and it just feels fantastic to play. I love playing the game. I think the game is a ton of fun, and if you're the type of person that would enjoy the type of gameplay that you're watching on screen right now, most likely you are going to enjoy this as well. So now let's talk a little bit about the visuals. Now, when it comes to the visuals of the game, I think that I've already stated that I think it nails all of the aesthetic aspects of it. I love the art style. I think they've done a fantastic job at portraying the Space Marines. They've done a fantastic job at portraying the other factions as well, the Chaos faction as well as the Tyranids. Everything looks great. The visual fidelity is actually really, really good. Like I said, I've been playing the game at 4K, but I have not been playing it on max settings. I reduced some stuff like shadows and a couple of other things. For those of you wondering what my system is, it is a Ryzen 9 5900X with a 6900 XT GPU. I have 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM, and I have the game running on an NVMe drive. If there is one complaint that I had, is that oftentimes the loads felt a little bit longer than they have any right to be when it comes to something that's on an NVMe drive. So that would have been my my one observation in regards to that. But in terms of visual fidelity, animations, cinematics, all of that stuff, absolutely top-notch. They've done a fantastic job. In terms of the performance, like I said, on my system, we're looking at running between 40 FPS to 60 FPS with, again, playing in 4K on a 6900 XT. Would I like the performance to be a little bit better? Yeah, I think it could have been a little bit better, but having said that, it's at least a video game that doesn't completely crap out on an AMD GPU, which a lot of new games coming out nowadays unfortunately do. On the other side of things, I have my friend Chris was playing it on a 4070. He had DLSS on, and he was playing, I think, at 1440p, settings maxed out, I believe, as far as I'm aware, and he was getting 90 to 100 FPS or something like that. So the performance, I feel like the game is pretty well optimized overall. It's just a matter of you playing around maybe with some of the settings depending on the type of hardware that you have, but I feel like the game is running fairly smoothly. Again, when it comes to this type of stuff, your mileage may vary. I'm giving you the report of somebody that has a 6900 XT and somebody that has a 4070 XT, an RTX 4070, and these, for us, the game was running absolutely fine, no issues whatsoever. So, with all of that said, what would be my biggest complaint? It is actually a sound thing, which I don't know if they might have already patched it because I haven't played it today yet, but this is something that is probably easily fixable in a patch. There were some things about the sound where, even though the sound effects themselves were pretty much flawless, the gun sounds, all of that stuff was great, the audio mix felt a little bit muzzled. Almost. It feels like the sound is maybe a little bit too far. Now, you can crank up your volume and fix this, but it feels like the audio mix could use a couple of tweaks. But even that is just kind of like a bit of a minor nitpick. The actual thing that bothered me the most was what they did with early access. This is something that I criticize everybody for whenever they do it, regardless of how much I enjoy the game. I think that charging extra for early access to your game, I think it's a little bit of a cheap move. I really don't appreciate when people do that, and I heavily condemn that. So in here, it's the same thing. I don't like the fact that they chose to give people, I think it's like 4 days of early access if you buy the gold version of the game, which is $30 more expensive than the regular version of the game. The base version of the game costs $60, has all the content in there. At least they didn't segregate any, like PvE content or anything like that, which is the type of stuff that the scumbags over there at Ubisoft like to do, where they take away some of your missions and then they're like, oh, it's bonus if you buy this extra special editions. At the very least, they didn't do anything like that. So if you buy it for $60 later because you can't afford, you know, the actual price of the gold version, all of that, the only thing you're missing out on is those 4 days of early access, which it does suck. I don't like that practice. It is something that I heavily condemned, and I really wish they hadn't done that, because it would just be so much better if I didn't have to talk about it in my video, because everything else for the game I find to be absolutely amazing, and then you have just like this blemish of the 4 days early access. And unfortunately, it is something that a lot of people are doing. Even my Game of the Year last year, Remnant 2, did the same thing. I think they did like 3 days of early access or something like that. But it is still a practice that I absolutely hate, and I really wish that people would stop doing that practice. But people are going to do what people are going to do. In terms of microtransactions for this game, there's like a couple of skins that you can buy if you get the Gold Edition or the Ultra Edition. I don't even know exactly what those skins are, because I didn't bother checking that stuff. It's all cosmetic stuff, and most of the things you will be able to unlock by just playing the game. But yeah, there are a couple of cosmetic DLCs that you get, but there's no like in-game store with extra currencies, at least at this point, unless they decide to add one later. Nowadays, I feel like I have to put that caveat on my videos, because we constantly have publishers being like, oh, look, there's no microtransactions. And then, like, you know, a month down the line, or sometimes even just 2 weeks down the line, they're like, actually, surprise, here's our new cosmetic shop we just put into the game. So right now, it doesn't have one, and I do believe that the developers don't want it to have one. It does have like a season pass that has a bunch of cosmetic rewards that will be doled out over the year, and some stuff that they're even planning on doing next year. So they want to support the game for at least a while still, which is encouraging, because I personally want to play some more of the multiplayer, as I greatly enjoyed it. Although, I'll be real, most of the multiplayer footage you're going to be watching for me is going to be just me playing Bulwark, because that's what I like to do. I go in with my sword and board and beat the crap out of everything, and it's one hell of a good time. But having said that, in multiplayer, there's like all types of different classes that can do all types of different things, from having different types of weapons like snipers and stuff like that, if that's something that you want to do, having special abilities like the Vanguard has the thing where you can web hook yourself into an enemy and then double kick him in the face. The Assault class has the jump backs that let you jump up in the air and then slam down with a hammer or a chainsword or something else, which is also brutally satisfying. The Bulwark has sword and shield, and then there's like, you know, certain classes that have melta rifles and stuff like that and can just do a ton of damage. There's a heavy class that has heavy weaponry and all of that allows you to do all kinds of different stuff in multiplayer. But having said that, I feel like this review is already way longer than it has any right to be. Hopefully this was useful for you guys in making your decision if this is a game that you want to play or not. Let me know in the comment section down below if this video was useful or not for you. And if you did enjoy it, hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification icon, all of that jazz. There will likely be a couple of more content in regards to this game on the channel, because I'm having a ton of fun playing the multiplayer. But for now, that is going to be it. If you enjoyed this video, well, I already asked for likes. Jesus Christ. I need to get some sleep. Love you guys. See you guys later. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.
Lieutenant Titus, this is objective coordinate.
Tentative bioscience 90% unfit.